The humiliation started with the clinking of champagne glasses. When my daughter-in-law, Crystal, thanked me for the $25,000 for their house, she didn't look at me with gratitude. She looked at me with pity. And the whole room looked at me the same way. Right there, at my own son's wedding, I realized I'd gone from being their rescuer to being their burden. Welcome, everyone. Thanks for tuning in. I'd love to hear where you're listening from. Share your city below. Let's begin this journey together. It all started at Andre's wedding. His wife, Crystal, hugged me and told the guests I'd given them everything. Her voice was filled with so much fake concern, I went cold inside. She turned my sacrifice into my weakness, and I knew this woman wasn't here to build a family. She was here to take. In the church, under the gaze of God and everybody, all you saw were smiles. My boy, Andre, my only child, looking so handsome in his suit. And Crystal, a picture of bridal perfection. She glided down the aisle like an angel, but I've lived long enough to know that the devil often wears the prettiest clothes. At the reception, held at a fancy place downtown I couldn't pronounce the name of, she raised a glass of champagne. Her voice dripped with honey. "To my new mother," she said, looking right at me, Esther May Washington, who helped us so much with the down payment on our beautiful new home in Atlanta. She paused, letting the words hang in the air. We couldn't have done it without her sacrifice. Sacrifice. That was the word she chose. Not investment, not agreement. Sacrifice. She made it sound like I was a poor, lonely old woman clinging to her son by throwing money at him. The $25,000 I gave them wasn't a gift. It was a deal. Written down and signed, a loan to be paid back so I'd have my own nest egg secure. But she didn't mention that part. Her girlfriends, all young and sharp-eyed, turned to look at me. Their eyes weren't filled with respect. They were filled with pity. That look you give an old dog you know isn't long for this world. In that moment, surrounded by flowers and laughter, she took my strength and painted it as desperation. She turned my love into a leash. I just smiled, sipped my sweet tea, and clapped along with everyone else. But I knew. Oh, Lord, I knew. What's done in the dark always comes to the light, and the lights in that ballroom were shining right on her true colors. 2 days. That's all the peace I got. 2 days after they said, "I do," my doorbell rang. I opened it, and there on my porch stood Crystal. She was wearing a bright yellow sundress, smiling like she was bringing me a plate of cookies. But next to her stood a man in a cheap suit carrying a leather briefcase. He had the kind of polished look that never quite settles right, like a bad paint job on a rusty car. "Mama Esther," Crystal cooed, stepping inside without an invitation. "We were so worried about you all alone in this big house. This is Mr. Davis. He's just here to help us sort out some paperwork for your care." Care. The word hung in my clean living room, smelling like bleach and lies. My house wasn't that big, and I was doing just fine in it. I'd been doing just fine on my own for the 10 years since my husband James passed on. Mr. Davis opened his briefcase on my coffee table right next to my Bible. The documents he pulled out had a fancy letterhead, Peachtree Senior Gardens, an assisted living facility, a nursing home, and another paper full of legal words that would sign away my share of the house Andre and I owned together, the house I'd helped pay for twice. They wanted to put me away. They wanted to take my name off the deed and stick me in a room that smelled of disinfectant and regret, all for $25,000 that was already mine to begin with. I looked at Crystal's sweet, smiling face. I looked at Mr. Davis, who refused to meet my eyes, and then I smiled right back. "Of course, honey," I said, my voice calm as a Sunday morning. "But after we finish here, let's take a little ride over to the DeKalb County Sheriff's Office. I promised them I'd stop by and tell them a story." Crystal's smile didn't just fade. It cracked and fell off her face. The color drained out of her cheeks, leaving her looking pale and pinched. Mr. Davis started shuffling his papers together, suddenly very interested in a tiny speck of dust on his briefcase. I understood this was an ambush, and I was ready for it. Crystal, bless her heart, didn't get her way that day, and a woman like her can't stand being told no. So she started her game. A quiet, nasty little war fought in the halls of my own home. She began planting seeds of doubt in my son's mind. 2 days later, she called Andre in a panic. "Andre, your mother left the stove on again. The house could have burned down." I heard his worried voice on the phone later. "Mama, are you okay? Crystal said you almost had a fire." I was making toast. In the toaster. The stove hadn't been on all day, but how do you prove that? A hard head makes a soft behind, and my son's head was getting softer by the day. She'd cancel our dinner plans, then tell Andre I'd forgotten and never showed up. He'd call, confused. "Mama, we were supposed to meet at Waffle House. Where were you?" She was weaving a web, thread by invisible thread, trying to paint me as a frail, forgetful old woman who couldn't be trusted on her own. She was trying to build a cage of concern around me, so when she finally locked the door, Andre would think it was for my own good. I didn't sign the papers that first day with the notary. I told them I needed my glasses, that I needed time to read them over. Crystal's eyes went from sugary sweet to cold, hard little stones. She wasn't used to patience. She was used to getting what she wanted, when she wanted it. The next day, she escalated. She must have been rummaging through my purse when I was in the garden. She found it tucked in a side pocket, an old prescription bottle. It was for Valium, filled a month ago. It wasn't mine. I'd picked it up for my friend Martha before she passed away from her cancer. In all the grief and arrangements, I'd completely forgotten to return it to the pharmacy. Crystal held the bottle between her thumb and forefinger like it was a dead roach. Her voice was no longer sweet. It was a low, ugly hiss. "Well, what do we have here, Mama Esther?" she said, her eyes gleaming. "You wouldn't want the guardianship court to find out you have a problem with pills, would you? It would make things so much easier for us to prove you can't take care of yourself." That was it. The mask was completely off. This wasn't about concern. This was blackmail, plain and simple. "You have 24 hours to sign those papers," she whispered, leaning in close, "or I'll be forced to tell Andre about your little secret. For his own good, of course." She thought she had me. She thought she'd backed a toothless old woman into a corner. She didn't know that I've spent a lifetime keeping records. I've saved every receipt, every contract, every promise, and every bill. My whole life is documented in a filing cabinet in the spare bedroom. She thought I was a sheep. She was about to find out I was the shepherd. I looked her right in the eye, my face calm. "All right, child," I said. "Have Mr. Davis come back tomorrow. 2 o'clock sharp. I'll have my decision then." She turned and walked out, the confident swing in her hips telling me she thought she'd already won. She had no idea the war was just beginning. The second that front door clicked shut behind Crystal, I moved. There was no time for tears or fear. Fear is a rocking chair. It gives you something to do, but it doesn't get you anywhere. I went straight to the spare room and pulled out my old sturdy accordion folder, the one with all my important papers. It felt heavy in my hands, a weight of history and proof. My armor. My first call was to my doctor, Dr. Lena Caldwell. She's been my physician for 20 years. She's a sharp, no-nonsense woman who doesn't suffer fools. "Dr. Caldwell," I said, my voice steady, "it's Esther May Washington. I need to see you today. It's urgent." I didn't mince words. "I need you to document my cognitive state. I need a letter stating in no uncertain terms that I am of sound mind and fully capable of managing my own affairs. Someone is trying to prove otherwise." There was a pause, and then her voice came back, firm as steel. "I have an opening at noon. Be here." She didn't ask questions. She heard the truth in my voice. At the clinic, she put me through the tests. Who is the president? What day is it? Count backward from 100 by sevens. Simple things, but they were the bricks of my defense. At the end, she printed out a letter on her official letterhead. It said, clear as day. Esther Mae Washington is alert, oriented, and demonstrates no cognitive impairment. She is fully capable of making her own financial and medical decisions. The first piece of my armor was in place. My second call was to a man I'd never met, but whose name I'd kept, Detective Miller. He was with the Financial Crimes Unit specializing in elder abuse. I'd seen him speak at my church, Greater Ebenezer Baptist, last year. He'd given out his card. I had it tucked inside my Bible. He picked up on the third ring. I explained the situation calmly, from the wedding toast to the notary to the Valium bottle. I told him the threat she made. He listened. He didn't interrupt, he just listened. When I was done, his voice was all business. "Mrs. Washington," he said, "do not under any circumstances sign anything. Do you understand? Nothing." He gave me clear instructions. "From now on, try to record any conversation you have with her. Your phone can do that. If they come to the house again, do not be alone. Call a neighbor, and call me. Let them walk into a trap of their own making." He believed me. A stranger, a police officer, believed me without question. That was the second piece of my armor. My third and final stop was the CVS pharmacy down on Candler Road. The unused bottle of Valium felt hot in my purse. I walked up to the pharmacy counter and asked for the manager, a young man named Carlos I recognized from the neighborhood. I explained the situation simply. "I picked this up for a friend who passed away. I forgot to return it. I need to return it now, and I need a receipt proving I did." He looked at the bottle, then at my face. He must have seen the determination there. He didn't just give me a receipt. He printed out the entire transaction history, showing the prescription was not in my name, and then a formal return document, which he signed and dated. "Here you go, ma'am," he said, his voice kind. "This proves you never took possession of them." I drove home and laid the 3 documents on my kitchen table: the doctor's letter, the detective's card with his notes scribbled on the back, the CVS receipt. I 3-hole punched each one and placed them carefully inside my folder, right behind the copy of the loan agreement and the deed to my house. Brave is just stubborn pointed well, and I was pointing my stubbornness directly at 2 o'clock tomorrow. My armor was ready. Punctuality is a virtue, and Crystal was nothing if not virtuous in her wickedness. The doorbell rang at exactly 2 o'clock. This time she brought Mr. Davis, the notary, with her. He walked in a step behind, his eyes darting around my living room as if looking for the best escape route. He wouldn't look at me. Crystal, on the other hand, was all smiles again, a performance worthy of the stage. She'd put the sweet mask back on, but I could see the cracks around the edges. She was anxious. Good. Mr. Davis spread his papers out on my coffee table, the same one where I'd served my late husband his supper for 40 years. It felt like a desecration. He cleared his throat and started in with that patronizing tone people use when they think your mind has gone soft. "Now, Esther Mae," he began, "we're just here to make your life a little simpler, to take the burden of these complicated decisions off your shoulders." He was still talking when I held up a hand. "Stop," I said. My voice wasn't loud, but it cut right through his little speech. The room went silent. "Before we sign a single thing," I continued, reaching for my folder, "I believe there are a few details you've both overlooked." I opened the folder. The first paper I laid on the table was a copy of the deed to the house. I slid it across the polished wood toward Mr. Davis. "You'll see there are 2 names on that deed, Andre Washington and Esther Mae Washington. It is not his house to give away, and it is not mine to be cheated out of. We are joint tenants." His eyes scanned the paper. A flicker of sweat appeared on his upper lip. The second paper followed. It was the loan agreement for $25,000, signed by both me and my son. I'd circled the repayment terms in red ink. "And this," I said, my voice even, "is not a gift. It is a legally binding loan. The word you used, Crystal, was sacrifice. The word I use is contract." Crystal's smile was gone now, replaced by a tight, thin line. Mr. Davis was starting to look pale. The third paper was the durable power of attorney Andre had asked me to sign a year ago, just in case. Crystal's eyes lit up for a second, thinking she'd found a loophole. I tapped a specific paragraph my lawyer had insisted on adding. As you can see, this power of attorney only becomes active upon the signed declaration of incapacitation by two, not one, but two independent physicians. I let that sink in. Then I placed the fourth document on the growing pile. And this, I said, looking directly at Crystal, is a letter from my doctor, Lena Caldwell, signed and dated this morning. It states that I am, and I quote, fully capable of managing my own affairs. The notary, Mr. Davis, physically recoiled from the paper as if it were hot. He looked at Crystal, a desperate, accusing look. He had been led into a snake pit, and he knew it. For the grand finale, I pulled out the small, crisp receipt from the CVS pharmacy. I didn't even slide it over. I just held it up. As for those pills you were so concerned about, Crystal, this is a receipt confirming they were returned to the pharmacy this morning. It also shows they were never prescribed to me in the first place. The silence in the room was thick enough to choke on. All that was left was the sound of the grandfather clock ticking in the hall, counting down the seconds of their failed little coup. Mr. Davis began snatching his papers off my table, shoving them haphazardly into his briefcase. His professionalism was gone, replaced by pure panic. I think there's been a misunderstanding, he stammered, not looking at either of us. I need to leave. He didn't walk to the door. He fled. Like a rat from a sinking ship, he was gone, leaving Crystal alone in the wreckage of her plan. She just stood there, staring at me, her face a mask of pure, unadulterated hatred. The sweet girl was gone for good. After the notary ran out, I knew one thing with absolute certainty. I could not lay my head down to sleep in that house another night. It wasn't a home anymore. It was a battleground. And my spirit was too old and too valuable to waste in a daily war. Peace of mind is a treasure, and I intended to keep mine. I didn't shout, I didn't cry, I didn't make a scene. Lord have mercy, there had been enough scenes. I simply went into my bedroom and started to pack. It's funny what you reach for when you have to leave the life you've built. Not the big furniture or the fancy china. I packed a small box with the things that held my soul. My folder of documents went in first, then my well-worn Bible. The framed photo of James and me on our wedding day, and my favorite blue ceramic bowl, the one my own mother used to serve me peaches in when I was a girl. I found a small, clean, one-bedroom apartment for rent in a quiet senior community over in Decatur. I paid the deposit with my own money from my own bank account. When Crystal saw me carrying a box of books out to my car, the shock on her face was almost comical. "What are you doing?" she demanded, her voice shrill. "I am moving out," I said calmly, not breaking my stride. "I am a grown woman. I can live on my own." I did not ask for permission. I did not wait for an argument. I just kept moving. The Lord helps those who help themselves, and I was helping myself right out of that toxic situation. I called Andre. I didn't tell him I was moving. I knew Crystal would deliver that news with her own poisonous spin. Instead, I said, "Andre, meet me for lunch. The Waffle House on Memorial Drive, 1 o'clock. I chose it for a reason. You can't hide behind fancy tablecloths and dim lighting in a Waffle House. The truth is as plain as the sticky syrup on the counter. He showed up looking tired and torn. He sat across from me in the booth, fidgeting with a paper napkin. I let him order his scattered, smothered, and covered hash browns before I began. I looked my only son in the eye. "We need to set some new rules, Andre. Consider them my 10 commandments." He looked startled, but he listened. "First, the $25,000 loan will be repaid to me according to the schedule we signed. The first payment is due on the 1st of next month." His face fell. "Second, from this day forward, you will speak to me directly. No more messages through your wife. If you have something to say to your mother, you will say it yourself." I paused, letting the words settle. And third, if you or anyone acting on your behalf ever again tries to question my competency, to declare me unfit, or to take what is mine, I will not protect you from the consequences. I will call Detective Miller, and I will let the law do what it does. Do you understand me? He tried to argue, to make excuses. But Mama, Crystal was just worried. She thought. I cut him off. I don't care what she thought, I said, my voice low but hard as iron. I care what you did. You stood by and let her do it. You have a choice to make, son. You can be a man who honors his word and respects his mother, or you can be a boy who hides behind his wife's skirt. You can't be both. I paid for our lunch and walked out, leaving him there with his plate of cold potatoes and the weight of his decision. A few days after I settled into my new apartment, there was a knock on the door. I wasn't expecting anyone. I opened it to find a woman I'd only seen once, from a distance, at the wedding. It was Crystal's mother. She was dressed in expensive clothes, a string of pearls at her neck, and a leather handbag that probably cost more than my first car. She smelled of money and trouble. She gave me a tight, practiced smile. "Esther May," she said, as if we were old friends. I was in the neighborhood. I thought we could talk, woman to woman. I let her in, but I didn't offer her coffee. This wasn't a social call. She sat on the edge of my new sofa, her back ramrod straight, and got right down to business. She opened that expensive handbag and pulled out something that made my breath catch. Stacks of cash, neatly wrapped bundles of $100 bills. She placed them on the table between us. $50,000. She said, her voice smooth as silk. Let's just settle this quietly as a family. You take this, sign a little piece of paper saying you have no further claims, and we can all move on. No need to involve courts and lawyers. It gets so messy. She wanted to buy my silence. She wanted to put a price tag on my dignity, my home, my name. And in her attempt to be clever, she revealed everything. Crystal is young, she said with a dismissive wave of her hand. She gets ambitious. Lord knows she's not the first person in our family to have to deal with a difficult older relative. We've always found a way to work things out. So this was a family business, cheating their elders, then paying them off when they got caught. What's done in the dark will come to the light, and her whole family history was steeped in darkness. I looked at the stacks of cash. $50,000. It was a lot of money, but it was tainted. It was the price of my soul. I pushed the money back across the table toward her. Here are my terms, I said, my voice as calm and quiet as hers. First, the full $25,000 my son owes me is to be sent to my account at the Atlanta Teachers Credit Union via a bank wire transfer. Transfers leave a paper trail. Her eyes narrowed. Second, you and your daughter will sign a statement in front of a notary of my admitting to the attempt to coerce me into signing over my property under duress. Her mouth fell open. And third, I finished, the three of us, you, me, and Crystal, will have a meeting with Detective Miller to discuss the matter. Her face turned to stone. The polite mask shattered. She snatched the money off the table and shoved it back into her purse. She stood up, her eyes spitting fire. "You will regret this," she hissed. She turned and stormed out, slamming the door behind her. I stood there in the quiet of my new apartment and thought to myself, "No, honey, bless your heart. Regret is a luxury you and your daughter are about to become very familiar with." The moment Crystal's mother slammed my door, I picked up the phone. I didn't wait. I didn't second guess. When a snake shows you its fangs, you don't sit around hoping it won't bite. You call the person who knows how to handle snakes. "Detective Miller," I said when he answered. "It's Esther May Washington. They tried to buy me off." I told him everything. The unannounced visit, the expensive handbag, the $50,000 in cash. I could almost hear him nodding on the other end of the line. "An attempted bribe to silence a witness, Mrs. Washington," he said, his voice grimly satisfied. "That's not just a family matter anymore. That's a felony. This solidifies your case." He asked me to come down to the precinct the next morning to give a formal, recorded statement. The police station was cold and smelled of stale coffee and industrial cleaner. It was a place stripped of all emotion, which felt like a relief after the last few days. I sat across a metal desk from Detective Miller, my folder open between us. I told him the whole story, from the first seed of disrespect at the wedding reception to the cash on my coffee table. I didn't cry. I just gave him the facts. When I was finished, I handed him the copies I had made of every single document: the deed, the loan, the doctor's letter, the CVS receipt. He took them and placed them into an official evidence bag. It felt like I was handing over a great weight. While I was there, sitting on a hard plastic chair as he typed up my report, my phone rang. It was Andre. His name flashed on the screen, and for a second, my heart ached. But I answered with a steady voice. He was talking fast, his words tumbling over each other. Crystal must have called him. "Mama, what are you doing?" Her mother just called. She said, "You're threatening them with the police. You can't do this. You'll ruin our lives." I looked around the bleak official room. I looked at the detective, a man sworn to uphold the law. "I'm saving my life, Andre," I said, my voice quiet but clear. "You ruined yours when you stood by and let this all begin." I hung up the phone. Based on my statement and the evidence of attempted bribery, Detective Miller got the warrant he needed. They didn't wait. Early the next morning, a DeKalb County Sheriff's car pulled up to that beautiful new house in Atlanta. They arrested Crystal on her manicured front lawn, right in front of the neighbors who were getting in their cars to go to work. The news spread through our community like a wildfire in a dry field. My phone started ringing off the hook. Members from Greater Ebenezer Baptist Church, old friends, neighbors. Some called to offer their support, their voices hushed with shock. Others called to pass judgment, asking me how I could do this to my own family. I answered every call with the same calm dignity. I did what was right. That evening, there was a gentle knock on my door. It was my neighbor, Mother Jean, a wise old sister from my church. She was holding a dish, still warm from the oven, covered in a clean tea towel. It was her famous peach cobbler. She didn't come with questions or gossip. She just came with comfort. She put the dish on my counter and took my hands in her own. "You hold your head high, child," she said, her voice a soothing balm. "The road for the righteous is not always smooth, but it is straight. Truth always finds its way." And as I ate a spoonful of that sweet cobbler, I knew in my soul that she was right. The wheels of justice turn slowly, but they grind exceedingly fine. The arrest set off a chain reaction of consequences that Crystal and her mother, for all their money, couldn't stop. First came the lawyers, demanding retainers that cost a small fortune. Then came the bail hearing and the public record of her arrest. Crystal worked in marketing for a big downtown firm. They let her go a week later. An employee facing felony charges was not good for their brand. Their perfect life was beginning to crumble, brick by expensive brick. Andre called me, his voice hollow with despair. "Mama, we have to sell the house. We can't afford it anymore. We need the money for Crystal's legal fees." The house. The very thing they had tried to steal from me was now being sacrificed to pay for their crime. There was a terrible, bitter poetry in it. I didn't gloat. I just said, "Those are the consequences of your choices, son." There was nothing else to say. In the meantime, Crystal and her mother launched their own little war of words. They started telling anyone who would listen that I was a bitter, vengeful old woman, that I was mentally unstable and trying to destroy my son's marriage out of jealousy. They were trying to poison the well to paint me as the villain of the story. But their stories were just words, smoke in the wind. I had my folder. I had my receipts. I had a signed statement from my doctor and an active case with the DeKalb County Sheriff's Department. I had my clear conscience. Their lies couldn't touch me. One evening, about a week before the first court date, Andre showed up at my apartment. He looked like he hadn't slept in days. He was thin and his eyes were haunted. He wouldn't look at me at first, just stood in the middle of my small living room, turning his car keys over and over in his hands. I waited. Finally, he sank onto the sofa and buried his face in his hands. His voice was muffled, thick with shame. "I knew," he whispered. "I knew she was going over to your house with the notary that day. She told me it would be easier for everyone. She said you were getting confused and this was the best way to protect you." He finally looked up at me, his eyes full of tears. "I knew it was wrong, Mama, but I didn't stop her." There it was, the confession, the truth I already knew but needed to hear from his own lips. I looked at my son, the baby I had raised to be a good man, and I didn't feel anger. I just felt a profound and heavy bitterness, a deep, aching sorrow for the man he had failed to become. "You were supposed to be my protector, Andre," I said softly. "You were supposed to stop her, but you didn't." That was his true reckoning, not the loss of the house or the money. It was the knowledge, which he would have to carry for the rest of his life, that when the moment came to stand up for his mother, he had chosen to sit down. The house was put on the market, a for sale sign hammered into the lawn like a tombstone. On the day of the hearing, I put on my best Sunday dress, the navy blue one with the lace collar. I walked into the DeKalb County Courthouse not as a victim, but as a matriarch. My head was high, my back was straight, and my heart was at peace. I was there to bear witness to the truth. Crystal was already there, sitting beside a high-priced lawyer. She looked small and washed out under the fluorescent lights of the courtroom. To avoid a trial and the risk of a harsher sentence, she had taken a plea deal. She would plead guilty to a lesser charge of attempted financial exploitation of an elder. The judge was an older man, Judge Franklin, with kind eyes and a reputation for being tough but fair. After the lawyers did their talking, he looked over his glasses at me. "Mrs. Washington," he said, his voice filling the quiet room, "the defendant has entered a plea, but I would like to offer you the opportunity to speak, if you so choose." I stood up. I walked to the podium and looked out, not just at the judge, but at my son sitting in the back row, and at the woman who had tried to break me. "Your Honor," I began, my voice clear and strong, "it's easy to dress up greed and call it concern. It's easy to take a person's age and try to turn it into a weakness." I paused, letting my words land. "I am standing here today because I had the strength, a folder full of papers, and a good detective who believed me. But I am speaking for all the ones who didn't, for the mothers and fathers who were silenced, who were told they were confused, who had everything taken from them by the people they trusted most." I sat back down. The judge looked at me for a long moment, then turned his gaze to Crystal. He reviewed the terms of her plea deal. 2 years of probation and 250 hours of community service. "The court accepts this agreement," he said formally. Crystal's lawyer gave her a small, reassuring smile, but the judge wasn't finished. "However," he continued, looking directly at Crystal, "what you did was not just a family squabble, it was a crime. You preyed on the person you were supposed to honor. You tried to steal not just her money, but her dignity and the roof over her head. This court feels that simple probation is not a sufficient lesson." A nervous energy filled the courtroom. The judge leaned forward. "Therefore, in addition to the terms of your plea, I sentence you to 30 days in the DeKalb County Jail." Crystal gasped. Her lawyer shot to his feet. "You will serve this time on weekends," the judge said, his voice like stone. "You will report to the jail every Friday at 5 p.m., and you will be released every Sunday at 5 p.m. for 15 consecutive weekends." A dead silence fell over the room. It was a masterful sentence. It wasn't just punishment. It was a prolonged, humiliating reminder, weekend after weekend, of the consequences of her actions. Justice, in its slow and steady way, had been served. I walked out of that courtroom and into the bright Georgia sunshine. feeling lighter than I had in a very long time. The sale of the house was the final, formal severing of the tie. We all met at a lawyer's office in a glass tower downtown. The room was generic and impersonal, filled with leather chairs and the quiet hum of air conditioning. It felt a world away from the home I had filled with the smell of baking bread and the sound of my son's laughter. Andre was there, looking thin and quiet in a suit that seemed too big for him. Crystal was not. Her presence was not required, and I suspect not wanted by anyone, including her husband. I sat at the long, polished table and signed my name over and over again on a mountain of paperwork. Each signature felt like a final goodbye to a chapter of my life. When it was all done, the lawyer confirmed the funds had been transferred. My share of the sale, along with the full $25,000 repayment, was now sitting safely in my account at the Atlanta Teachers Credit Union. The numbers on a screen didn't feel like a victory. They just felt correct, like a crooked picture being set straight. As we stood to leave, Andre walked over to me, his hands shoved deep in his pockets. "Mama," he said, his voice low, "you have it all back, every last cent." I looked at him, my son, who still didn't quite understand. "It was never about the money, Andre," I replied, my voice gentle but firm. "It was about a man keeping his word. It was about respect." He nodded, unable to meet my gaze. He told me he and Crystal were living apart. He'd moved into a small rental, and she was staying with her mother while she served out her weekends in the county jail. "I don't know what's going to happen next," he admitted, looking lost. We stood for a moment on the curb, outside the tall building, the busy city life rushing past us. He looked at me, his eyes pleading. Will you ever let me back into your life?" he asked. It was the question that all his shame and regret had been leading to. I thought for a long moment. I looked at his face, and for the first time in months, I saw not the weak man who had betrayed me, but the little boy I had raised. "The door to my home is always open for a son who respects his mother," I told him. "When you find that man inside yourself, you come on home." I turned and walked toward the bus stop, not looking back. I was leaving the house, the debt, and all the pain behind me for good. I was finally, truly free. A year passed. Time, the great healer, began to smooth over the raw edges of my life, leaving behind the quiet peace of a well-earned scar. My little apartment in Decatur became my sanctuary. My days found a gentle, happy rhythm. Tuesdays were for senior yoga at the community center, where I discovered my old bones could still stretch farther than I thought. Thursdays were for the book club at the local library, and Sundays, of course, were for the Lord at Greater Ebenezer Baptist Church, followed by coffee with Mother Jean. My life was not grand or exciting, but it was mine. It was full of what I called ordinary goodness. The accordion folder, my weapon and my shield, was retired to the back of my closet. It was like an old tool that had done its job well and could now rest. Andre began to come back, slowly. At first, he would just call on a Sunday afternoon. Then he started stopping by. He never came to ask for anything. He came to give. He'd bring me my favorite sweet potato pie from the bakery. He'd spend an hour fixing the leaky faucet under my sink that I'd been ignoring. We didn't talk about the past. We didn't need to. We started building something new, something quieter and more honest. We'd cook Sunday dinner together in my little kitchen, the way we used to when he was a boy. He was proving himself, not with words of apology, but with steady, dependable acts of love. He was, step by step, becoming the man I had told him to find. One Sunday, he came over, and his eyes were shining with a light I hadn't seen in years. He sat me down on my sofa and took my hands. "Mama," he said, his voice thick with emotion, "you're going to be a grandmother." The words hung in the air, a promise of a future I wasn't sure I'd ever get to see. I didn't burst into tears or shouts of joy. A lifetime of hard lessons had taught me to accept blessings with a calm and grateful heart. I simply squeezed his hands and nodded. "That is a blessing, son," I said, "and a heavy responsibility. You be sure you're ready for it." A new purpose filled my days. My quiet harbor of a life was now preparing for a new arrival. I bought a second-hand crib and spent weeks sanding it down and painting it a soft, buttery yellow. I sat in my favorite armchair in the evenings, my knitting needles clicking away as I made tiny booties and soft blankets. My little apartment, once a symbol of my independence, was slowly turning into a nursery, filled with the quiet, joyful anticipation of a new life. My granddaughter was born in the fall, a tiny, perfect thing with my son's eyes and a surprisingly strong grip. They named her Hope, a name that said everything that needed to be said. The first time Andre brought her to my apartment, he placed her in my arms. As I held that warm, sleeping bundle against my chest, I understood. Every fight, every document, every lonely night and difficult decision, it was all for her. I was fighting for a future where this little girl would know she came from a line of women who did not break. My apartment became their second home, their safe place. Andre would drop Hope off with me for a few hours while he ran errands. He trusted me again, completely. That trust was more precious to me than any amount of money. I became her grandmama, the keeper of her naps and the singer of her lullabies. And when Hope was old enough to sit up on her own, I knew it was time. I went to my kitchen cabinet and took out my old blue ceramic bowl, the one that had belonged to my mother. I filled it with small, soft crackers and set it on a blanket on the floor. She crawled right over to it, her little face a picture of intense concentration. She reached a chubby hand into the bowl and pulled out her very first cracker. Watching her sit there, happily munching with my mother's bowl in front of her, I felt a circle close, a line of love, stretching from my past, through me, and into her future. That was the real inheritance. Later that evening, after Andre had picked her up, I sat down at my kitchen table with a pen and a fresh sheet of paper. I began to write a letter to Hope, one I would give her when she was old enough to understand. I told her about her family, about the importance of keeping good records, and about the difference between sacrifice and investment. I wrote, "My dearest Hope, it is important to have your name on a deed, but it is more important to have respect for your name in your heart." I told her about her strength, the strength she inherited from a long line of women who knew how to weather a storm. I folded the letter and tucked it away. I ended it with one last piece of advice from her grandmama. "And if anyone at all, ever shows up at your door with a notary and a sweet smile, you make them a cup of coffee, then you call the cops, and you call me." My life is full of ordinary goodness now. The quiet joy of a sleeping baby, the comfort of a Sunday dinner, the peace of a home that is truly my own. I know that my legacy isn't in a bank account. It's in the strength I'll pass down to my granddaughter. It's in the lessons tucked away in that letter. It's in the simple, profound love held within an old blue bowl. And for me, that is more than enough. I'm grateful you spent this time with me. If you've lived through something similar or if my story spoke to you in any way, please share your feelings in the comments. I'd love to hear them. Your stories matter too. If you want more, don't forget to like and subscribe. Be gentle with yourself, and I'll see you in the next story.